Yo, welcome to another episode of IMAGI Fantasy Football. Today, we're all going to be talking about our 2021 fantasy football MVPs, guys who we expect to significantly outperform their fantasy draft position and likely win you a title, hopefully, if we're correct. These are guys who probably none of them are going to finish number one, number two overall at their position. A lot of them could, but there's guys here too who might finish top 15, top 20, but relative to where they're being drafted, it's going to be an absolute steal for you and guys who are going to play a huge role in you winning your league this season. So without further ado, Dant, get us started with your 2021 fantasy MVP.
All right, so Darren Waller, I think, is definitely a lock to finish as a top 3 tight end. He's being drafted at 22. That's his current ADP. Last year, he had 146 targets, and now Nelson Aguilar is gone. He had like 80 targets. And this offense has no other good players than Darren Waller. Like Henry Ruggs is still unproven. Brian Edwards has a lot of buzz in camp, but that's just camp. They cut John Brown. So Darren Waller's the only target in this offense. And these guys, they play the Chiefs twice, the Chargers twice. So they're going to be down in games and just throwing the ball. So he's a lock to finish top 3. I think he could even outperform Travis Kelce. While that's a bold take, everyone thinks that Kelsey's just going to be number 1 every year consistently. I think Darren Waller is the only tight end that has the upside to finish as the tight end 1 overall. And you're getting him at a significant value compared to Travis Kelce. Travis Kelce goes in like the first round in most drafts. But you can get Waller in like the late second, early third round. And I think he could definitely have a chance to finish as the overall tight end 1.
Unless Travis Kelce goes down to injury, or Patrick Mahomes goes down to injury, I don't see a single way that Darren Waller can finish as the tight end 1. Sure, he has like the receptions and stuff like that, but his yards per reception is never going to come close to what Travis Kelce is going to do. I think, honestly, Darren Waller may have hit his peak last year. I don't know if he can outperform what he did last year. Well, with Travis Kelce, I could definitely see him outperform what he did last year, even though what he did last year was absolutely legendary. I think right now he's going at the perfect price. He's going right above George Kittle, but he's significantly behind Travis Kelce. And I think that's for good reason. I think he's a pretty clear tier behind Travis Kelce. I don't think there's a way he can really outperform him. He doesn't really have the tight end, the overall tight end 1 upside. Unless Travis Kelce goes down, but he's going to be a lock for, I think, tight end 2 or tight end 3 this year.
Yeah, I think right now, at this point in this offseason, I guess the season comes next week, but he's definitely a tier behind Kelce right now. But I think when the season starts, we're going to see he's going to get so many targets, and he's going to be their only like legitimate like threat on the offense. Like Josh Jacobs. Yeah. I don't know about that.
I mean, Josh Jacobs is good. He's good. He's good.
He's good, but
stop it.
I don't know. I don't know about Josh Jacobs.
He has talent.
3.9 yards per carry speaks talent to you.
Yeah, that's true. But I think they want to run the ball a lot. They want to run the ball. That's going to be their identity.
I mean, they have a completely rebuilt offensive line. So right now, while Waller is a tier behind Kelce, while Waller is a tier behind Kelce, I think he's closer to Kelce than he is to anyone else.
I think he's closer to Kittle than he is to Kelce, but you know.
Yeah. I think
as of right now, he definitely is.
I was just gonna say, I think his ADP is, it could be, you could draft him a bit higher. I wouldn't see any problem in that. 22 is just that maybe in some competitive drafts he might be gone by then, and so it's up to you really whether you want to go tight end, wide receiver heavy in this draft. And there's really no problem with drafting him earlier as long as he's not drafted before Kelce or like Devontae Adams or like an elite wide receiver.
All right, let's move on to our second fantasy MVP for this season.
All right, so the guy that I chose for my fantasy MVP was Deontay Johnson. Now, Deante Johnson is an absolute steal at where he's going right now. He's going at the overall number 51. I think he's going around like wide receiver 22, 23, around there. And that is just an unbelievable value that you can get on a guy that was on pace for, if you like extrapolate what he did last year, so he missed 3 games. I mean, he left 3 games early and he missed 1 game. So basically you can take out 4 games, and sure, during those 4 games, I guess 6 targets, we'll take those out. He was getting 11.5 targets a game. You extrapolate that through a 17-game season, he's getting 200 targets. if a player is getting 200 targets in a PPR setting, and he's going at overall number 51, that is simply the best value you're going to get in the draft. And I think that's what really makes a fantasy MVP, a guy that you get in like the mid to late rounds, maybe even early rounds, but that's a little bit more rare, that can absolutely just like elevate his performance to what can be like league winning. So I have a bunch of there's a bunch of other stuff that's amazing, like about Deontay Johnson. It's just overlooked completely, and I have no idea why. So he got more targets per game than every single player in the NFL, other than Keenan Allen and Devontae Adams, two elite wide receiver ones. And yet he's being talked about in the same tier as someone like Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, Cooper Kupp. He's going around to that tier when he should be up in that tier in like the third, the fourth round. I think early fourth, late third. I think that's where he should be going. At points last year, he was performing like a wide receiver one, yet he's being drafted as like, you can get him as your flex. You can draft 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, and get him as your flex when you're drafting him at 51. It's unbelievable. And sure, you can say, oh, he suffered from drops last year. Drops are not a sticky stat, and that's honestly not something that deters me from drafting him at all. He's one of the best route runners in football. And if you're open, you're going to get the ball. Whether you drop it or not, that doesn't matter. You're an NFL caliber wide receiver. You're going to catch the ball so many more times than you're going to drop. And people are like pointing out, oh, he led the league in drops last year. Well, if you look at the past 2 years, right, the players on top of the drop list, the drop leaderboard, Tyreek Hill, Stephon Diggs, A.J. Brown. And I never hear anyone talking about, oh, these guys drop the ball a lot. That's going to be a problem. So dropping the ball, that's not a thing that I'm worried about at all when it comes to Deontay Johnson.
I completely understand why you are this high on Deontay Johnson. I agree. He could have an absolutely phenomenal year, be a wide receiver one. But I mean, just with me for the Steelers offense, that I know the offensive line is horrible, but I mean, you're drafting Najee Harris. I expect it to be a much more balanced offense than it was last year. You're not going to be having Big Ben's aged. Yeah, he's aged. You're not going to have him throwing the ball as much as he was last year. I mean, I expect Claypool to take a big step forward this year. And I expect Najee Harris as well.
Forward can you expect them to take though? Because Juju, they were willing to let Juju go. But they were,
but they brought him back. I mean, they were willing to let him go, but the fact that they did bring him back signals the fact, okay, they're still going to keep him involved in the offense. I see Harris taking away a lot more targets than Connor did last year, a lot more touches than Connor did last year. Johnson, if he plays 17 games, I think his floor is probably 140 targets, but we'll see. Can he clean up the drops? And we'll see, does Ben Roethlisberger maybe fall off a cliff this year? And does Claypool maybe become the number one instead of Johnson this season?
Yeah, I honestly don't think that Claypool can overtake Deontay Johnson. Deontay Johnson is just an absolute beast. I mean, like, he is one of the best route runners in football. And like you say, those type of guys aren't like number ones on an NFL team. Well, on the Steelers themselves, they turned Antonio Brown into the best wide receiver in football for a stretch of time. And I honestly think that Deontay Johnson, like, if push comes to shove, I think he could have like top 7, maybe low end to mid tier wide receiver one upside. And the real thing that like attracts me to Deontay Johnson is where you can get him at drafts. I would be comfortable having him as my wide receiver one if I had like an elite tight end and then two or three running backs. If he was my wide receiver one, I wouldn't care because he is just a beast, man. And if he's getting like these type of targets, I mean, I'd be so comfortable with him.
All right, I just like to address the drop stat. That stat is just, it doesn't make any sense because even with the drops, Tyreek Hill and Stephon Diggs finish as like the top 3 wide receivers last year, not the wide receiver 20.
No, I'm just saying right? the drops don't matter. Drops don't matter. That's
drops. Well, they don't matter now. But if you can say they won't continue, but they could also continue. This guy had 144 targets and was the wide receiver 21. Like, it just doesn't. And there's a reason he's being drafted so low. People wouldn't just Why? Not the whole fantasy industry is not going to ignore 144 targets. Ben Roethlisberger is not going to throw the ball that much. Chase Claypool is going to take a few more targets. They added Najee Harris, and the drops. Anyone can just say drops won't matter, but he could just be a receiver that drops passes.
How? But how? Literally, how?
Just because you're an NFL wide receiver doesn't mean you don't drop balls. He could just not be nice.
Look
That's
at
a
the
bad hand.
percentage of drops. You got to look at the ratio of targets to or catches to drops, right?
And he had like
Sure, he had
15
a large
drops, I
amount
think.
of. No, sure, he had a lot of. He had a rather large amount of drops last season, but with the amount of targets he's getting, I mean, you kind of.
I
you
mean,
don't
what is he
expect
doing
it,
with
but
those
it's-
targets? He's finishing as the wide receiver 21. Tyreek Hill's drops don't matter because he finishes as the wide receiver too. So they don't.
Yeah.
You don't consider that.
Just I want to add one more thing and then we'll move on. You were saying like, last 2 seasons, Tyreek Hill, Stephon Diggs, AJ Brown, Deontay's
Okay,
not
you're
up there.
focusing way too much on that stat, bro. That was just to tell
Well,
the
no,
drops
because
that was ridiculous. That was
stat is-
ridiculous.
It's kind
Bro,
of
it's just
meaningless in
drops
the
don't
context
matter.
of
I don't know
this.
why you're looking so far
But they
deep.
do matter. I mean, we look at a guy like Nelson Aguilar. I mean, notorious for dropping the ball. I mean, Deontay Johnson, could he be like that if he has another bad year?
No,
of drops
he
this year?
could. Oh my
Absolutely.
god, bro.
He had
You-
15
I-
drops or something last season. 15 drops, I think it might have been more than 15 drops last season. But
All of his
I don't
drops
know, I
happen
mean-
in big.
Ju-
No.
Just like
drops
you're,
are
just
not a
like you're
thing that
saying,
matters. They don't
just
matter.
like you're saying, drops don't matter. I'm saying that he could just be a guy that drops the ball. If you have 144 targets, there's no reason you should finish as the wide receiver 12.
no.
It's just
So yeah, he definitely has the wide receiver one upside Nav is talking about, and he's probably got a decent floor too because of the targets. I just don't know that he can significantly outperform his ADP with everything the Steelers have done around him this season, and because of the fact that he does struggle with drops, and despite having 144 targets, he had 923 receiving yards last season. So let's move on now to our third fantasy MVP for this season.
So for my fantasy MVP this season, I got Corey Davis. So recently, Corey Davis this season, he traveled to the New York Jets from the Tennessee Titans, and he's actually been lighting it up. One thing I would like to mention about Corey Davis is that he is a kind of a guy that flies under the radar. He doesn't really get too many ESPN posts about him, and he's not seen as much of a fantasy threat. But last season, Corey Davis was 16 yards shy of 1,000-yard season. He had 65 receptions on 92 targets. And mind you, this is alongside talented receivers like A.J. Brown and Jonnu Smith. Not to mention Derrick Henry's also on that offense. And the Titans pretty much run through Derrick Henry. And now he's on the Jets with Zach Wilson. And he's played 2 preseason games so far. He has put up a good amount of numbers. He's actually had 88 scrimmage yards in those 2 preseason games combined. And so you see he has this kind of chemistry with Zach Wilson. And one of the biggest things I want to point out here is the current ADP, which is 97. And then I feel like 97 is way too low. He's being drafted as like a sleeper or maybe like a bench asset at this point. But Corey Davis can really be a reasonable flex at this point in the year. And I think he can definitely outperform that 97 ADP. I mean, again, look at his stats. It's on the crowded Tennessee Titans wide receiver room. You see him flourish this much. Who knows what he'll do as the wide receiver 1 as the Jets. We've seen Robbie Anderson on the Jets produce a decent amount. Maybe Corey Davis. I know it's a different stream now, but maybe Corey Davis, we could see a similar production from him.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Shree. I think Corey Davis this year, he has a chance to be last year's Robbie Anderson. I mean, a guy who kind of not comes out of nowhere necessarily with Davis because we do have this preseason hype surrounding him, but Davis could easily be a guy who is a fantasy afterthought who becomes a fantasy wide receiver 2 maybe this season because of the fact that Zach Wilson, as up to this point, has looked like everything he's been advertised to be. And Corey Davis is clearly his primary target, and they don't have much behind Corey Davis for receiving options. I mean, they've got rookie Elijah Moore, hasn't proven anything yet. He's had a lot of hype, but we've yet to see it from him. And then behind Elijah Moore, I mean, they got Jamison Crowder, and I mean, I don't even know who else they have. And then, I mean, it's a team that's going to be losing a lot of games, so they're going to be throwing the ball. I mean, Corey Davis, I think right now his ADP is 97. I mean, finishing as like the overall 97th player, maybe it's like his floor, but he could easily finish as like a guy in the wide receiver 20 range, which would be an absolute steal for where you're getting him. I do think his ADP will rise and probably is on the rise right now. But I mean, as when we're recording this, it's 97. So if you can get him there, absolutely do it.
Exactly. Just one last thing I wanted to add in here, John. Thanks for the input. He also had 13.7 fantasy points per game, and that's big coming from your flex, especially when you don't want to turn to guys like, say, Jerry Jeudy, who's a bit more uncertain, or maybe just other examples of flexes who may have inconsistent production, but that may be from a crowded wide receiver room or from inconsistent quarterback play. Corey Davis, on the other hand, he's shown he can put up a solid weekly amount. But if you want an elite flex, you're probably looking for that type of guy earlier in the rounds. But right now, as of today, he's 97, like John said, and that would be an absolute steal to get him there. And so, yeah, he could win you a couple weeks this year. Who knows?
Yeah. Now I'm done. You guys have anything you want to add?
I mean, he's going to be a fine flex, I guess, this year. I don't really see him going to like the high end to mid wide receiver 2. He's either going to be a low wide receiver 2, a good flex. I don't think I can see him really outperforming that.
You could see him.
I agree.
I agree. He could be like I think he could definitely be like a mid wide receiver 2 at his ceiling, but again, with where you're getting him would be an absolute steal, like last year's Robbie Anderson again. So let's now move on to our final fantasy MVP for this season. Okay, so our last fantasy MVP, and this is my guy for this season. He's actually on my IMAGI Fantasy roster for our league, is Jonathan Taylor. And coming into this offseason, I was not in on Jonathan Taylor at all. I'll be completely honest. And I get the concern, okay, that Marlin Mack is back and Taylor was dog water until the final 7 games of last season, and the passing work from Nyheim Hines, and Frank Reich likes to run his committee. But just all you're hearing about from Colts training camp is all this negative news, but the one positive thing that they have to say is that Jonathan Taylor looks like an absolute specimen, that he's the best player on the field at that training camp by far. Mm-hmm. Okay, and look at what I understand that what he did over the last few games of the season is unsustainable, and that it did come against bad defenses, but it still happened. We can't ignore it. He had a 250-yard rushing game. I mean, it clearly shows you the ceiling that the guy has. And Jonathan Taylor, again, Frank Reich, he's come out multiple times in camp saying that Taylor looks absolutely amazing. Him and Chris Ballard both saying it's a guy that they think could be an absolute superstar, a guy that they want to be their workhorse back, a guy who they think can be a 3-down back. And now I understand the concern with Marlon Mack, but not many guys can come back from a torn Achilles and even be half of what they were before that. A torn Achilles might be one of the most difficult injuries to come back from in all of sports. I mean, we see it in the NBA, NFL. It's just an extremely difficult injury to come back from. And so, I mean, Taylor, again, at the end of last season, he was getting 65 to 70% of the snaps in most of those games at the end of the year. In the playoffs, again, against the Bills, we saw him continue to shine. He had 20 carries, 80 yards, and a touchdown, I think, which if it was fantasy production, I mean, we'd be satisfied with it because he had a couple of catches too. I mean, this is a guy, I think there's 4 guys who could truly lead the league in rushing this season. Those are Derrick Henry, Nick Chubb, Dalvin Cook, and then Jonathan Taylor, if he gets the workload that I expect him to get. And then, Nyheim Hines on third downs. Hines doesn't play unless it's an obvious passing situation or it's 3rd and 7, 3rd and 8. Then, yeah, Hines will go in. But 3rd and 5 and less, Jonathan Taylor was always in the game last season. And this season, after what we're hearing from Frank Reich and Chris Ballard, I mean, he could even be in on some of those 3rd and 7, 3rd and 8s. He caught 36 receptions last year. He could maybe cut 40, 45 passes this year and up his rushing totals by a lot too. It's a guy who I think's got clear top 5 running back upside this year, if not top 3.
Okay. All right. So let's go through this again. All right. So first of all, Marlon Mack is really not someone that I'm concerned with. He's not going to be a real threat to Jonathan Taylor this year. It's really Nyheim Hines. It's mainly him that I'm concerned with. I mean, he got, what did he have, 64 receptions last year? Something crazy. And he had Phillip Rivers as his quarterback last year, who he historically has thrown the ball to running backs more than any other quarterback in the league, more than even Tom Brady and stuff. So now from going from Phillip Rivers to Carson Wentz, I think he's going to see a downgrade in targets. We might see his targets split in, he might have 30-ish targets at the entire season. I don't see his target total going up this year, personally. Also, his top 5 upside, top 3 upside, I just don't think that exists for Jonathan Taylor. You see, if he got the passing down work that Nyheim Hines gets, if Nyheim Hines went down, okay, yeah, for sure, he could be top 3, top 5, that type of running back. But as long as Nyheim Hines is there, Jonathan Taylor is going to just be a solid RB1. I see the comparison that I did was a budget Nick Chubb, but he's super talented, right? Jonathan Taylor is going to be amazing for fantasy. But I don't know if he's going to have that league-winning upside that you really want from the stat early of a pick because of his limited receiving upside.
I get where you're coming from because Hines is clearly an amazing receiver, but I mean, again, last season when the Colts, I mean, they had Taylor in their doghouse, and Taylor still was the guy who third and short, like 3rd and 5 and less, he's the guy on the field, not Hines. Hines would come in to maybe spell him at times for carries, and then on obvious passing downs. And you make a good point. Phillip Rivers, one of the guys who loves to throw the running backs more than maybe more than any other quarterback in NFL history. But I mean, with Wentz coming in, I mean, Wentz is a guy who likes to throw to the running back too. I mean, we saw Milo Sanders last year was getting games with 8, 9 targets. I mean, if Taylor can even,
I don't think that even happened once, bro.
it did weeks 2 and 3. I think Sanders had like 7, 8 targets each of those games.
Did he? Did he really have that many targets?
He had a good amount of targets.
He did. 7
he had 8 targets, 4 receptions, 12 yards. Okay. I didn't notice because he had no receptions. He was really bad last year, Milo Sanders. Yeah. All right.
He was. He was. But yeah, with Taylor, again, I think the guy that you made a comparison to him of Nick Chubb, I think that's a good comparison for him. It's a guy who I don't think him rushing for 1,500 plus yards and double-digit touchdowns is out of the picture. And if he does that and gets even the same receiving work that he got last year, I mean, I don't see how he wouldn't be a top 5 running back, if not top 3. I expect him to get 18 to 20 carries a game to start the year, especially because you're going to be easing Carson Wentz back in. He's not going to be full strength to open the season. And I mean, hopefully the O-line is full strength. If the O-line is not what it is, then you might be disappointed with Taylor at the start of the year. But I think down the stretch, and even by like week 4, he should be, if he's not already, he's going to become an absolute monster by then.
I mean, even if Nyheim Hines gets his work, this guy started the year off slow and still had 1,100 rushing yards and 11 touchdowns. So if in a full 17-game season, he can just, even if he doesn't get the receiving work, he could still get like 1,600 rushing yards, 13 touchdowns. Plus, this Colts team has no receivers. Like T.Y. Hilton's going to be out, even though he was already washed. Michael Pittman, Paris Campbell, Carson Wentz has been injured. He's been on the COVID list. So I could really see Jonathan Taylor, he's going to have a strong start to the year, and it could just continue throughout the rest of the season, even if Nyheim Hines gets the receiving.
Yep. Shri, Nav, you guys have anything you want to say before we wrap up?
No, I think we can wrap it up.
All right, guys. So that's all we've got today for you. We got each of us gave our one player we think could end up as this season's fantasy football MVP. Thank you for watching our video. Be sure to like and subscribe if you liked it. Be sure to check back because we will be uploading more content soon with week 1 right around the corner. Appreciate y'all for watching. Make sure you come back and thanks.